Okay, so for this video review, we're talking about Julian Delgado Lopera's Fiebre. Now, I picked this book specifically because it was like about a queer story, and as a queer individual myself, I was interested in reading something about that. But this book, I feel like, doesn't exactly do what it intends to do, or it intends to tell two different stories, and I don't think it does a really great job at doing either of them. When it comes to good stuff in this novel has a lot of voice to it, and it really benefits from being in the first person in that aspect. Francisca's personality drips off of every single line, every single paragraph in this book. It's there's so much voice to it. The character feels like they're talking to you, which is really nice. It's a nice aspect. And then, the inclusion of Spanish phrases and English phrases in kind of random spots really adds to it. It doesn't feel like it's being written by an author most of the time, other than two specific spots, really. And talk about that. So when it comes to stories here, there's kind of two things being told. One is Francisca in Miami and her family, and then the second is her coming to terms with her sexuality. Those are the two topics. When it comes to Miami and her family, Francisca's thoughts are pretty static. They don't really change. She wants her mom to be the way she was in the past. That doesn't change through the whole novel. In fact, her mom kind of gets worse by the end. Her descriptions and opinions on Miami remain the same throughout the novel. Those don't really change either. So I'm left kind of wondering if that was the point, if it was supposed to remain static, in which case it just kind of feels, I don't know. I didn't really care. I was indifferent to it. It felt a little boring, if I'm being honest. The static thoughts, as many times as like Miami and her family are brought up, the fact that it's just the same stuff being said over and over again is just, I don't really care. And then the second thing is Francisca's, her relationship with Carmen. And this is really, I think, where the novel drops the ball hard. Carmen is a character that I can't really find myself caring about just because of how little her presence is actually felt in the novel. She has maybe, 20 direct lines of dialogue at most. Her relationship with Francisca takes place over about 2 chapters, and then she's just basically written out of the story. So she's gone most of the time. And I'm left indifferent, I feel like, to Francisca's feelings, just because that time to build the relationship wasn't there. I just didn't care. And I think there are novels or stories that can do what Fiebre Tropical was trying to do with relationships like this, but they've done better. Call Me By Your Name is a really good example. That story really focuses on the relationship between the two main characters, and you really see it develop over the course of the story, and it made me feel something that this novel, I don't think, made me feel at all. Carmen's just not really that impactful. She's not around enough. The story is split trying to tell an adaptation to this town and an adaptation to Carmen, and it feels like there's not enough page space, there's not enough chapters maybe to like really do either of those stories justice. It feels like you're reading half a novel. I feel like there should have been like maybe 10 more chapters or so to really develop these ideas, but they aren't there. And now I think would be a good time to mention that there's also some space taken up, I feel like, that didn't need to be taken up by backstories for Mommy and Tata, that are kind of inserted in really weird spots that really break up the pacing of the novel. And Francisca goes from like, this first person account of someone to like this almost retrospective voice. That was another thing in the novel. I can never really tell if like Francisca's telling the story from the past, or if it's happening right now, or in her thoughts. I wasn't really clear, but anyways, these two backstories, they're like the two longest chapters in the story, and they take up so much space, I think, that could have been used for developing better ideas. These chapters aren't poorly written. I think they're written better than the other stuff. It's just that in the context, I don't really see where they connect. They're supposed to connect somewhere, like, thematically, like with Tata's experience, seeing the nun, does connect to Francisca's own experience with, like, Carmen. You can draw that line, but there's not really any climax reached with that idea, and it's not really touched by Francisca herself. And with a character with so much personal voice, the fact that there isn't really any reflection on that it's left ambiguous for the reader, doesn't really make any sense to me. I think this novel suffers from creating an ambiguous ending without really earning it. When it comes to these coming-of-age stories, which the story is very generic coming-of-age story, without the voice present, without, like, the insertion of different Spanish phrases, this would be a very generic story. But when I read coming-of-age stories, I'm not expecting, like, some ambiguous, like, Kubrick ending. Reading a story again, like A Shining, where I have to, like, I feel myself, like, questioning, like, what really happened? What's going on here? Like, theorizing with it. I don't really care to do that with these kinds of stories. And that's really just a personal thing. I'm just not interested. By the end, I didn't really care what happened to Francisca. I didn't really care what happened to the family. I didn't have any predictions in my head. I just was indifferent. I think like, that ambiguous ending there, when it hadn't really earned it, was kind of a flaw. Especially when there's so much more that could have been explored in this novel. Like, I thought what was happening with Mommy was really ambiguous by the end. I'm assuming she was sick with something, her hair is falling out, or it was stress, or I don't really know. And maybe that's just because I was reading it too fast, but it wasn't clear to me. It wasn't really expounded on. I wish there was more time spent on it. And I think that's really my final thoughts on the novel, is that it needed more time. There are so many characters who are introduced, like Carmen's basically introduced. Carmen's introduced at the beginning, but she doesn't really start interacting with Francisca till, like, the middle. So there's, like, all this space. There's, like, the first 5 chapters are dedicated completely to the baptism, which made me think the story was going to focus more on Mommy more, but it doesn't. She kind of drops out as the novel keeps going on. She drops out of the picture, and again, she doesn't really change at all. I mean, she kind of does, but not in any way that's super impactful. And then Wilson is another character who kind of just shows up at the end and stays around, and I just don't really care about him. Andrea is another one. These characters who show up, like, where I feel like they should have appeared more and given more voice, but they just don't, and I just end up not really caring about the characters. I just think it needed more time. I think this novel needed more time to cook. I think it needed to drop the ambiguous ideas, because the compounding of the themes just makes the ending seem less earned. But yeah, I think it just needed more time.